The distant crash of the sea against the rocky shores of Vestfold echoed through the mist-shrouded dawn of summer, 847 AD. Freydis Magnusson stood at the prow of his longship, the Storm, his weathered hands gripping the carved dragon figurehead as his crew pulled against the tide. His deep-set eyes, the color of stormy skies, scanned the horizon, searching for the coastline that would lead them home after 3 long seasons of raiding. "The gods have favored us," Freydis called Halder, his second-in-command, gesturing to the bounty of silver, furs, and thralls secured below deck. "Odin has guided our swords well." Freydis nodded but remained silent, his mind not on their plunder but on the weathered piece of vellum secured in the leather pouch against his chest, a map unlike any other, taken from a dying Christian monk in Northumbria. The monk's final word still haunted him: "The temple holds more than treasure, it holds truth." As the familiar cliffs of home came into view, Freydis felt none of the usual relief. 3 years a widower, he returned not to the warm embrace of family but to the cold politics of jarls and the emptiness of his hearth. His daughter, Astrid, now 12 winters, would have grown taller in his absence, perhaps more distant with each raid that took her father away. The men cheered as they approached the settlement, but Freydis's attention was drawn to an unusual sight, a foreign merchant vessel anchored in the harbor, its design unlike the Norse ships. Its presence could mean many things, few of them good in these uncertain times when alliances shifted like sand beneath the tides. Katla Larsdottir pulled her cloak tighter as she followed her uncle through the muddy paths of the Norse settlement. Though she wore the dress and mantle of a proper Norse woman, her darker coloring and the subtle differences in her bearing marked her as an outsider. Born to a Norse father and a Frankish mother, she had spent her life between 2 worlds, never fully belonging to either. "Remember why we are here," her uncle Eric muttered, his voice low as they approached the great hall where the Jarl would be holding court. "We seek only to trade and gather information. Nothing more." But Katla knew there was more. Her uncle, a trader by reputation but a spy by truth, served the Frankish king. Their presence here was not merely for commerce but to gauge the strength of the Norse settlements, the plans of their warriors, and the weaknesses in their defenses. Information that would be paid for handsomely upon their return. "I understand, uncle," she replied in the Frankish tongue, her voice barely audible. "I will play my part." The great hall loomed before them, its timber walls rising like the ribs of some great beast. Shield maidens and warriors mingled in the courtyard, some eyeing the foreigners with suspicion, others with curiosity. Katla felt their gazes like physical touches, assessing, judging. She had grown accustomed to such scrutiny, but it never ceased to make her skin prickle. Inside, the hall buzzed with activity as warriors celebrated their return, mead flowing freely, tales of battle growing taller with each cup. Smoke from the central hearth fire swirled toward the rafters, where ravens perched like omens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, watching all for the All-Father. Jarl Sigurd Haraldsson sat upon his high seat, a man whose grey beard and battle scars spoke of many winters of warfare. Beside him stood his advisors, and among them, a man whose presence immediately drew Katla's attention. Taller than most, with shoulders broad from years of wielding sword and axe, his auburn hair and beard framing features that seemed carved from the very stone of the fjords. "Freydis Magnusson," her uncle whispered, following her gaze. "They say he is favored by Thor himself, his raids always successful, his blade always thirsty. Be wary of that one, he sees more than most." As if summoned by her thoughts, Freydis's eyes met Katla's across the crowded hall. For a moment, time seemed to still, the noise of the celebration fading to silence. In his gaze, she saw not the bloodthirst of a berserker but something unexpected, a weariness, a questioning that matched her own inner conflict. Then the moment broke as the Jarl called for attention, and Katla looked away, her heart inexplicably racing. She had come to spy on these people, to help protect her mother's homeland from their raids. She could not afford to see them as anything but enemies. But as the night wore on and she observed the Norse customs, the elaborate toast-making, the skaldic poetry honoring fallen warriors, the evident respect for their gods visible in every blessing and ritual, she found herself drawn into their world despite herself. Freydis could not shake the memory of the foreign woman's eyes, amber flecked with gold, like sunlight through honey mead. There was something in her gaze that spoke of secrets, of a life lived between worlds. It intrigued him more than he cared to admit. Later that night, as most of the settlement slumbered, Freydis sat alone in his longhouse, the map spread before him on a table of oak. The vellum crackled beneath his fingers as he traced the inked lines, coastlines he recognized, landmarks familiar to any who sailed these waters. But there, where the map showed a small island off the western coast of what the Christians called Scotia, lay markings he could not decipher, symbols that belonged neither to the Norse nor to the Christians. "What secrets do you hold?" he murmured to the empty room. A noise at his door startled him from his contemplation. His hand flew to his seeks, the short blade never far from reach. "Who goes there?" he called, his voice steady despite the lateness of the hour. The door opened slowly to reveal Halder, his face grim in the flickering light of the hearth fire. "Forgive the intrusion, my friend, but there is something you should know. The foreigners, they are not simple merchants." Freydis carefully rolled the map, securing it with a leather thong. "Speak plainly." "One of our men overheard them speaking in their tongue. They serve the Frankish king, gathering knowledge of our defenses, our plans." Halder's voice dropped lower. "The woman is half Norse, the daughter of Lars Otterson who betrayed our people to marry a Frankish woman years ago." The revelation should have angered him, but instead, Freydis felt a strange disappointment. So she is a spy. The Jarl plans to question them at first light. If they are found guilty of treachery, the sentence needed no completion. Spies faced either the blade or the slave collar, there was no middle path. Freydis nodded, dismissing Halder with a gesture. Alone again, he found his thoughts returning to the amber-eyed woman. Katla, he had heard her name spoken during the feast. Katla Larsdottir, daughter of two worlds, loyal to neither fully. Perhaps in that, they were not so different. For had he not begun to question his own path? The endless cycle of raiding, the bloodshed that brought wealth but never peace. The map called to him again, its promise of something beyond mere treasure. Something worth more than silver or thralls. Something, perhaps, worth changing for. With sudden resolve, Freydis gathered the map and a few essentials. He would need to act quickly if he were to follow his instincts. And his instincts told him that Katla Larsdottir might be the key to unlocking the map's mysteries, if he could reach her before the Jarl's justice did. Katla woke to the cold kiss of steel against her throat. Her eyes flew open to see Freydis Magnusson looming over her, one hand pressing a blade gently but firmly against her skin, the other covering her mouth to prevent any cry for help. "Make no sound," he whispered in Norse, his voice surprisingly gentle despite the threat of his blade. "Your uncle's treachery has been discovered. The Jarl's men will come for you both at dawn." When he removed his hand from her mouth, Katla did not scream but fixed him with a defiant stare. "If you know this, why are you here? To claim the honor of killing a spy yourself?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "If I wished you dead, you would not have awakened." In the dim light filtering through the smoke hole above, she could see he carried a small pack and wore a cloak for traveling. "What do you want from me?" Freydis withdrew the blade and stepped back, giving her space to rise. "I have a map, one that shows the way to an ancient temple, perhaps older than even the gods themselves. The markings on it are neither Norse nor Christian, but I believe they may be Frankish in origin." Understanding dawned on Katla's face. "You need someone who speaks the language. I need someone who walks between worlds, as you do." He held out his hand, a gesture both commanding and questioning. "Come with me, help me uncover what lies hidden, and I will see you safely away from here before the Jarl's justice falls." "And my uncle has his own fate to face." Freydis's expression hardened. "He came here to gather information that would lead to the deaths of my people. I offer you a chance because I sense you are not driven by the same hatred." Katla hesitated, weighing her options. To refuse meant certain capture, possibly death. To accept meant placing her trust in a Viking warrior whose reputation spoke of blood and conquest. And yet, there had been something in his eyes during their brief encounter in the Great Hall, something that suggested depths beyond the simple narrative of the ruthless raider. "The temple," she said finally, "what do you believe lies within it?" "The monk who gave me the map spoke of truth, not treasure." Freydis's voice took on an intensity that surprised her. I have seen enough of this world to know that silver tarnishes and glory fades. If there is something more to be found, something beyond the endless cycle of raid and revenge. His words trailed off, but Katla understood what remained unspoken. She too had grown weary of being caught between warring peoples, of serving purposes not her own. I will come, she said, rising to gather her few belongings. But know this, Freydis Magnusson, I do not trust you, nor should you trust me. We use each other for our own ends, nothing more. He nodded, accepting her terms without argument. We leave now, while the settlement sleeps. My ship awaits. As they slipped through the shadows of the sleeping village, Katla cast one glance back at the house where her uncle still slumbered, unaware of the fate awaiting him. A pang of guilt twisted in her chest, but she pushed it aside. Eirik had chosen his path long ago, using her heritage as a tool for his schemes. Perhaps it was time she forged her own destiny. The Shorm waited at a small hidden cove north of the main harbor, a skeleton crew of trusted men already aboard. They regarded Katla with suspicion as she climbed aboard, but none questioned Freydis's decision to bring her. As the ship glided silently into the pre-dawn mist, Katla felt the weight of her past slipping away, replaced by the uncertain promise of what lay ahead. Beside her, Freydis stood tall against the growing light, his eyes fixed on the horizon and the mysteries that awaited them beyond it. 3 days at sea had taught Katla much about the man who had become both her captor and her salvation. Freydis Magnusson commanded his men with a quiet authority that required no shows of force. They followed him not from fear but from respect earned through shared hardship and fair leadership. She watched him now as he stood at the steering oar, his eyes narrowed against the salt spray, navigating by stars and currents with a skill born of years upon the waves. The wind had tangled his auburn hair, and the constant exposure to sun and sea had deepened the lines around his eyes. Not an old man by any measure, but one who had lived each of his 35 winters fully. We approached the island, he called to his crew, pointing toward a dark smudge on the horizon. Make ready. The small island rose from the sea like the humped back of some great beast, its rocky shores offering little welcome to seafarers. A narrow beach of black sand provided their only landing point, the rest of the coastline consisting of sheer cliffs pounded by relentless waves. As they beached the ship, Katla felt a strange unease settle over her. The island seemed to hold its breath, the usual cries of seabirds absent, the wind itself falling silent as they stepped onto the shore. A forsaken place, muttered Halder, making the sign of Thor's hammer across his chest. No wonder no one has found this temple, if it exists at all. Freydis unrolled the map, comparing the coastline to their surroundings. The monk's markings show a path inland, through that ravine. He pointed to a narrow cut in the rocky landscape. We make camp here and begin our search at first light. That night, as the crew huddled around a small fire built from driftwood, Katla found herself seated beside Freydis, away from the others. He handed her a cup of mead, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Tell me, he said quietly, what drove you to spy for the Franks against your father's people? The directness of his question caught her off guard, but she saw no accusation in his eyes, only curiosity. My father abandoned my mother when I was but a child, she replied after a moment. She raised me alone in Francia, teaching me both languages, both cultures. But while she spoke of Norse ways with respect, the raids that came year after year taught me to fear the Northmen. She stared into the flames, memories flickering before her eyes. When my uncle offered me the chance to help protect Frankish shores by gathering information, it seemed a way to honor my mother's suffering. Freydis nodded slowly. And now? Having lived among us, even briefly, do you still see only the raiders? Katla met his gaze steadily. I see a people devoted to their gods, their families, their honor. But I also see the widows and orphans left in your wake. No people are holy monsters or holy gods, Freydis. Not even yours. A smile tugged at his lips. Wisely spoken. Perhaps that is why the map came to me, a man growing weary of the raider's path, and why fate brought you to interpret it, a woman who sees both sides of our warring worlds. The intimacy of the moment stretched between them, unexpected and fragile. Katla looked away first, uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through her chest. This man was not meant to be anything to her beyond a means of escape, a temporary ally in her journey home. Yet as she laid her head down to sleep that night, the sound of his deep voice speaking with his men, the glimpses of the man beneath the warrior's exterior, followed her into her dreams. Dawn broke grey and misty over the island as they began their trek inland. The ravine Freydis had identified narrowed as they proceeded, its walls rising higher until they walked in perpetual twilight, the sky a mere ribbon of light above them. The markings on the map, Katla said, studying the vellum as they walked, they're not Frankish as you thought. They're much older, a script my mother showed me once, said to belong to the people who lived in these islands before even the Picts arrived. Freydis looked at her with newfound respect. Can you read them? Not fully, but enough to understand that we seek not just a temple, but a gateway. She traced the intricate symbols with her finger. A place where the world of gods and men intersects. Halder, overhearing, spat upon the ground. Christian nonsense. There is only Midgard for men and Asgard for gods, with Yggdrasil connecting all 9 worlds. Perhaps, Freydis replied thoughtfully, all peoples glimpse the same truths but speak of them in different tongues. The ravine eventually opened into a secluded valley, hidden from the sea by the surrounding cliffs. At its center stood a ring of standing stones, each twice the height of a man, weather-worn and covered in lichen. But it was what lay beyond the stone circle that drew their attention, a mound of earth and stone, clearly shaped by human hands, with a dark entrance visible on its eastern face. The temple, Freydis breathed, a note of awe in his voice. As they approached the stone circle, a sudden wind whipped through the valley, carrying with it a sound like distant voices chanting in a language none recognized. Several of the crew crossed themselves with Thor's hammer again, muttering prayers to ward off ill fortune. We should make offerings, Katla suggested, remembering her mother's teachings about respecting unfamiliar holy places. Whether to your gods or mine or those who came before both, it would be wise to show reverence. Freydis nodded in agreement, and they prepared simple offerings, bread, mead, a silver arm ring from their plunder. These they placed at the base of the largest standing stone before proceeding toward the mound. The entrance was low, requiring them to stoop as they entered a narrow passageway lined with fitted stones. Freydis led the way, torch in hand, with Katla close behind him and 3 of his most trusted men following. The rest remained outside, too unnerved by the ancient place to venture within. The passage descended gently before opening into a central chamber that drew gasps from all who entered. The room was perfectly circular, its walls lined with niches containing offerings left by long-dead worshippers, amber beads, bronze weapons, clay figurines of forgotten gods. But it was the ceiling that captured their attention, a perfect dome covered in spiraling patterns that seemed to move in the flickering torchlight. It's a map, Katla whispered in realization. A map of the heavens. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, and upon it rested a small chest of bronze, green with age. Freydis approached it cautiously, aware that such places often held traps for the unwary. The monk's words, he said softly. The temple holds more than treasure, it holds truth. What truth could be worth such secrecy, such protection? Before Katla could respond, Halder pushed forward impatiently. Whatever it is, it belongs to us now. He reached for the chest. Wait, Freydis began, but too late. As Halder's hand touched the bronze, a grinding sound filled the chamber. The entrance through which they had come suddenly sealed itself, stone sliding against stone with ancient but effective mechanism. At the same moment, small openings appeared high in the walls, and the sound of rushing water reached their ears. The tide, Katla realized with horror. The temple is connected to the sea. Water began pouring into the chamber through the openings, cold and relentless. The men shouted in alarm, rushing to the sealed entrance, trying in vain to force it open. Freydis alone remained calm, his attention fixed on the chest. There must be a way, he muttered. No one builds such a place without a means of safe access. As the water rose to their knees, Katla joined him at the altar, examining the chest and the stone upon which it sat today. Look, she said, pointing to inscriptions around the altar's edge. These are the same symbols as on your map. Together they traced the symbols, Katla translating as best she could. That which divides shall unite. That which ends shall begin. Only through the joining of opposites may truth be found. The water had reached their waists now, its icy grip stealing the warmth from their bodies. The men's shouts grew more desperate as they searched the walls for any escape. Opposites, Freydis repeated, looking from the chest to Katla. Norse and Frank. Raider and defender. Understanding dawned in Katla's eyes. Man and woman. Without further words, they placed their hands upon the chest together, their fingers intertwining atop the ancient bronze. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a sigh, the chest opened. Inside lay not gold or jewels, but a small stone tablet covered in writing more ancient than any Katla had seen before. At the same moment, the water stopped rising, and a new opening appeared in the wall opposite the original entrance, a passage upward toward safety. Quickly, Freydis commanded his men, tucking the tablet carefully into his tunic. Before the tide rises further. They rushed through the new passage, climbing steadily upward until they emerged from an opening near the top of the mound. From this vantage point, they could see that the island was now cut off from their landing place, the black sand beach submerged beneath the risen tide. "We are stranded until the waters recede," Halder said grimly. Freydis nodded, but his attention was elsewhere. Finding a sheltered spot among the rocks, he carefully withdrew the tablet, motioning for Katla to join him. "Can you make any sense of it?" he asked as she examined the ancient writing. Katla studied the tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's unlike anything I've seen before, and yet, there are elements that remind me of both Norse runes and the oldest Frankish scripts." She traced the symbols gently. "I believe it tells a story, one of a time when our peoples were not enemies but kin, descended from the same ancestors." "That cannot be," Halder interrupted, having approached unnoticed. "The Franks are weaklings who hide behind stone walls. We are the children of Odin and Thor." "And yet," Freydis said quietly, "did not Odin himself wander far and wide, taking many forms, fathering many lines? Perhaps the truth is not as simple as we have been taught." The tablet contained more than just writing, it held a map, more detailed than the one that had led them here. A map showing not just islands and coastlines, but ancient settlements long forgotten, trading routes that connected peoples across vast distances, and at its center, a location marked with a symbol that combined elements of both Norse and Frankish sacred signs. "A royal treasure," Freydis murmured, tracing the symbol. "Not of gold, but of knowledge, the knowledge that our peoples once lived in peace, traded, intermarried, shared gods and stories." Katla felt the weight of his words, understanding now why the monk had emphasized truth over treasure. In a world torn by raids and retribution, the knowledge that enemies were once family was indeed more valuable than any hoard of silver. "Such knowledge could change how our peoples see each other," she said softly. "If it were believed." Halder's laugh was harsh. "And who would believe it? The Jarls whose power rests on leading raids? The Frankish lords who rally their people against the northern demons? This tablet would be destroyed before its message could spread." His words hung in the air, their truth undeniable. Freydis and Katla exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever they decided to do with this knowledge would have consequences far beyond themselves. 3 days later, the Shorm sailed south, away from Norse lands, toward the shores of Francia. On board, an unlikely alliance had formed, Freydis and his most loyal men, accompanied by Katla, now bound not by necessity but by shared purpose. The decision had not come easily. When they returned to the ship, Halder had argued vehemently that they should return to their Jarl with the tablet, claiming its worth as a curiosity if nothing else. But Freydis, after long hours of discussion with Katla, had chosen a different path. "I have raided enough," he had told his men as they gathered on the beach. "Taken enough lives, created enough widows and orphans. If this tablet speaks true, then perhaps there is another way for our peoples to exist, not as enemies but as trading partners, as they once were." Some, like Halder, had chosen to part ways, taking a small boat back toward Norse settlements. But many had stayed, curious about what lay ahead, or simply unwilling to abandon the leader who had kept them alive through countless raids. Now, as they approached the Frankish coast, Freydis stood beside Katla at the prow, both gazing toward the land that represented danger for him and home for her. "Your king will not welcome Viking ships on his shores," Freydis said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "How do we proceed?" Katla smiled, a plan already formed. "We fly no raven banner, carry no weapons in plain sight. I will go ashore first, to a monastery I know where my mother's brother serves as abbot. He is a learned man, one who values truth above politics. If we can convince him of the tablet's authenticity, he can arrange an audience with those who might listen." Freydis studied her profile against the setting sun, seeing in her the strength and wisdom that had drawn him to her from their first meeting. In the days since discovering the tablet, as they had worked together to decipher its ancient message, something had shifted between them, respect deepening to friendship, and friendship blossoming into something neither had dared name. "And after," he asked, his voice low, "if we succeed in delivering this message, what then for you?" "For us?" Katla turned to face him fully, her amber eyes meeting his grey ones without fear or reservation. "I have lived between worlds all my life, Freydis Magnusson. Perhaps it is time to build a new one, where I need not choose." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers just as they had in the ancient temple. "The tablet speaks of joining opposites. Perhaps we were meant to find it, you and I." "Perhaps," she agreed, a smile playing at her lips. "Or perhaps we make our own fate, as your Norns weave and my god designs." As the shores of Frontier drew nearer, Freydis felt a peace he had not known since before he first lifted sword in raid. Whatever awaited them, success or failure, acceptance or rejection, they faced it not as Norse and Frank, but as two people who had glimpsed a truth larger than the conflicts that had shaped their lives. The royal treasure they sought was not gold or glory, but a future where the children of once united peoples might find their way back to each other. And in Katla's eyes, Freydis saw the promise of that future beginning with them.